Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm Aisha Sayed, and I hope you all are doing very, very well. Today, we have the pleasure of talking to Dr. Salma Raheem, a researcher and academic at the University of Liverpool. We will be discussing about her academic journey and getting to know her thoughts on multiculturalism and its implications. And I'm sure we will gain some incredible insights. Now, let's welcome our guest. Assalamu alaikum. How are you doing?
Walaikum salam, Aisha. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. Alhamdulillah, I'm doing all right.
Perfect. So Dr. Salma Raheem is a researcher and academic at the University of Liverpool, UK, with expertise in social inclusion, multicultural teams, leadership development, and intercultural training. She earned her PhD from the London School of Economics and Political Science. Dr. Raheem's work on multinational companies in emerging economies, particularly in the Middle East, has implications for international human resource management, talent management, cross-cultural management, identity and team dynamics. She received the Lecturer of the Year award at the University of Liverpool in 2022-23 and has won over other teaching awards at London School of Economics and the University of Liverpool. Thank you for joining us. It is a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you, Aisha.
So to begin with, please share a little bit about your background and your academic journey.
So I was born and brought up in the Middle East. So both Dubai and Saudi Arabia. And this is pre-Gulf War, so I'm kind of old. And I mentioned pre-Gulf War because in those days, it was a lot more open. There was less conflict between social groups. You didn't have any of the background of the war. So it was very open. And in Saudi Arabia in those days was also very different. I had friends from all over the world in my classroom. We were very multicultural as a community growing up, but also in classrooms, how we learned, how we talked to each other. And that was a really, really amazing experience. And alhamdulillah, I'm really, really blessed to have had that experience. To give you a small example of how that has an impact on an academic journey, I remember one of the exercises that my brother used to say, because my brother also studied in the same school, was when they were learning, I think in first or second grade, they were talking about how we use tenses, time to talk about events, chronological events. First I did this, then I did that. And that was the actual English lesson. So the teacher asked, the children in the classroom, they asked, so what do you do when you get up in the morning? What's the first thing you do? What's the second thing you do? And, quite a few people said, oh, first I get up, I go to the bathroom, I wash my face, I brush my teeth. So the teacher simply asked, and then I eat breakfast, etc. I get dressed, etc., etc. So the teacher asked the question, well, why do you brush your teeth before you've eaten instead of after you've eaten? And so that is just thinking critically, thinking about why do I do the things that I do the way that I do them? And so then you start this process of, well, because that's what my parents taught me. But why did they teach you that? What's the thinking behind it? What's the rationale behind it? So even something as simple as an English exercise about learning about how to talk about events in your chronological order. The whole ethos of teaching was all about critical thinking and asking questions about why do I do the things that I do in the way that I do them? Where did I learn to do this from? What is this passed on wisdom? And so what's the rationale or the logical thinking or the explanation or the scientific reason or the emotional reason or maybe a religious reason for doing the things that we do? And when you have a very international classroom, that constantly keeps coming up because everybody is doing things in a different way and everybody has a different rationale for why they're doing what they're doing. And everybody thinks that their rationale makes sense until they hear a different rationale. And then they reevaluate and they think about, is there a better way for me to do it? How can I get more benefit? Or what is it that I'm trying to achieve in the way that I'm doing whatever it is that I am doing today? So that has been sort of the root of all of my kind of academic journey. And I've always been curious about how is it that other people do things? What's a different way to think about whatever it is that I'm doing? Whether it's how you dress, the foods I'm eating, where I'm going, how you deal with the problem, how you deal with the crisis, how you react to joy, how you react to what the neighbor is doing. So this has framed my academic journey from a very early age. I've been inherently curious, and for a researcher, that's a primary need. You're inherently curious although we all have our prejudices and our biases as we grow up and we're socially conditioned to think certain ways, at least there was an early awareness that maybe my thinking is going to be different for the next person's. In fact, another one of my friends who grew up in that space, she was saying as she's grown up, she's really, she finds something morally wrong with homogeneity. Why should everybody be the same? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. We're all created differently, so we obviously should be thinking differently. And isn't that the beauty of the whole thing? So why do we need standardized procedures to do one particular thing? What's the purpose of it? Is there a little bit of agility and flexibility that we can incorporate to respond to whatever immediate needs or changing needs that there are? So that part of thinking about, evaluating, critically thinking, reflecting, curiosity about what are other ways to do this has always been part and parcel of the way I've learned, studied, and approached academics in general. So there was never this concept of rote learning. I couldn't stomach it. I couldn't understand it. I hated it with a vengeance. So I actually struggled in the Indian curriculum in the sense that I was one of the, academically very highly inclined students. So I was one of those students who got, A pluses all throughout kindergarten and first grade and elementary and all of those things. So I did well at the end of the day because performance is something that's really important. And again, if you are second generation in a foreign country, academic achievement is really, really important. That's the whole point of your parents sacrificing and going out and trying to make a better life for children. So you reciprocate by doing well academically. But that inherent curiosity is one of the reasons I enjoyed academics. I enjoyed the process of learning, which involves being curious, but also unlearning and thinking about maybe, that might have been wrong, my thinking. Maybe there's a different way. So it was fascinating just to absorb knowledge and then reevaluate how I live my life and how I react to other people and the things around me. So it's always been fascinating for me. And that's reflected in the grades, because you do need the grades to get into a PhD program or a higher level education if you want to keep going. And when I was doing my MBA, so I actually went back to my education. I got married after my degree. I had 2 children. I subsequently got divorced, and I actually went back into education. So I went to do my MBA with 2 little children, with phenomenal support from my parents and my extended family. It turned out that I was one of those, quote, smart students in class, even though I was older than everybody, including two cohorts combined. So the MBA program was with Ohio University. They had a campus in Bangalore at that time. And my organizational behavior professor, who was an emeritus professor in the US, he said, what are you planning to do after this? And I was really keen to have a consulting career. I was thinking consulting is the be all and end all, because it's all about problem solving. And I like the idea of, these were the skills I could take into a problem solving space. So then he said, why don't you consider doing a PhD? And I didn't even know what a PhD was at that time. So I was like, what's that? So then he introduced me to the concept of the PhD. He was even so really such a wonderful human being and a mentor, where he actually said, listen, I'll pay for your GMAT. I'll even pay for it. Why don't you just try and write the exam and see where it goes? Mm-hmm. So he's the first person who put that seed of an idea of doing a PhD. And life circumstances didn't allow me to do a PhD at that time, but I remember writing on a yellow sticky note, PhD, and it was stuck on my mirror for nearly 4 years, 4 years, nearly 5 years. And I had that one day I will do a PhD. How, when, what is it going to look like? What am I going to do with this PhD? I had no clue. I had an opportunity to come to the UK, and in that, just life circumstances, I happened to apply for a PhD program. I wrote a research proposal. I was in touch with quite a few of my professors from my MBA days who were very supportive. I actually got published while I was doing my MBA. And so there was a lot of support from my MBA professors to consider a career in academia. And I got in. Alhamdulillah, interviewed, wrote exams, whatever it is, for the different universities. I got in, alhamdulillah, everywhere I applied. I chose the LSE at the end of the day because it was the supervisor at that time really liked my research proposal, and there was a good alignment in terms of our research interests. And that's where I joined.
That's quite an interesting journey. So you talked about critical thinking, and it's something that's really important, especially when like kids are introduced to it in really primitive years in school, and we don't see that happening in majority of the schools, especially in in India. Do you think that it opens up the kid's mind? Obviously, it does. Do you think that it impacts how they grow up and become older and go out in the world and explore? Do you think critical thinking have an impact?
Critical thinking is identified as one of the key skills by the World Economic Forum going forward. So you have things like AI, you have plenty automation, you can get degrees left, right, and center. Higher education has become much more affordable and accessible. So what is making one person different from the next person in terms of dealing with global issues? Now, we have some real serious problems in the world, whether it's the climate crisis, we have garbage being dumped in all sorts of places. We have serious issues with chronic illnesses. We have a lot more, for example, childhood obesity. There's, life is getting tougher from a financial perspective. We don't have the financial security that our previous generations had. There's a lot more stress. We just finished with a pandemic. So there are some serious problems in the world. And if everybody's got a degree and everybody thinks the same way and everybody's just repeating the same stuff over and over again from textbooks that were written in 1950s, how are we going to change anything for the better? How will we improve our lives for ourselves and for the rest of humanity? So without those critical thinking skills, it's going to be a real problem. The challenges for India in that space, from the limited knowledge that I have, I'm not an expert on the Indian education system in any way. I've been on the receiving end of some of it. My children have studied in India. So from that little bit of experience in comparing it to my previous education and my education here, the biggest challenge, I think, is we don't give enough support to our educators. We don't provide them with classroom facilities, with tools. Our BEd training is pretty much outdated. There is so much out there that needs to be done. And this obsession to do very systemized, very homogeneous, very boring kind of work. It's not go home and chart. No. And then the students copy everything off of Wikipedia and paste it there. And then, if you can do a colored chart with some printouts, you're the smartest person on the planet. No, nothing has passed between the brain cells. There's no engagement with any learning. Maybe classroom sizes are too big, but a lot of it is in smaller class. I remember when I was teaching, so I did teach in India for a while as well. So I taught communicative English before I did my MBA. So one of the things was, they won't speak. You are taught from a very small, all the other teachers are telling the children, keep quiet, sit down. You there, sit down, keep quiet. You keep quiet, sit down, sit down. That to get a class in order is to tell everybody to keep quiet. Here is what you need to produce on this test. This is the correct answer. There is only one correct answer. And everybody's told they must reproduce this particular thing. They're not required to think. In fact, they're told specifically not to think. Don't talk too much. Don't act over smart. Don't write your own answers. Here is the answer. So, you are actively told in school not to think, let alone critical thinking. You're asked to leave your personality behind. You are asked to not engage. Now, I'm not saying this is for all teachers across all of India. Of course not. We're a big country and it's very diverse. And there's a lot of skills in terms of the teaching. My professors were amazing, for example. But does something need to fundamentally change? Yes. So when I teach here in the universities in the UK, we now have, especially with the introduction of the post-study work visa, we have a lot of students coming from India. And this year, and I've told the dean of the business management school, it has been my worst experience of teaching in the nearly 2.5 decades that I've been teaching across schools and all the way to executive education. Because they cannot think. They cannot read instructions. You're given 3 instructions. In fact, and they're confused because they need to be told, go left, go right, sit here, write this. Because they've never had to think and take any independent thinking, any independent engagement. Why am I doing what I'm doing? What is the purpose of this assignment? What is the purpose of this? Like, why am I? And when you ask them, what are you doing here? To get a degree. I said, you don't get a degree, you earn a degree. That's not how this works. You actually have to put in the work. And when I say put in the work, I can give you general instructions, but this is independent learning. You have to show the motivation. You have to show the initiative. You have to be proactive. It's not teacher-centric. We're not in school anymore. You're an adult. You're 20 years old or 22 years old, so you need to be able to figure these things out by yourself. But all they're up to that 18 years of their life or 22 years of their life, if they're doing masters or 23, they've been told this is the way to do it, and that's it. We're talking about even at our engineering colleges, because my son did his engineering, and so it's the same story. The sir gives the notes. What are we doing? What are we doing? We are crippling our youth. Because they're completely incapable of thinking for themselves or understanding what needs to be done. So we have had the highest number of plagiarism cases ever in the history of the management school, and it's all Indian students. They are completely incapable of writing anything by themselves without copy and pasting from somewhere. And that's because they don't have the reading skills, they don't have the writing, the critical thinking skills, and then they're unable to articulate their own independent thinking and create an argument. So do we have a serious problem for the future? Yes. Is this all students? No, definitely not. I mean, the ones who are able to do this, they stand out a mile apart. So, if you're a young person or you're a parent who's bringing up your children, I strongly suggest that, change the way you're thinking about their education. It's not about getting a 90 in maths. It's why are you doing, calculus? Why are you doing this? Where is it going to be used? What is NPV for? What is the practical use of knowledge? How can you apply it somewhere? What can you find out about different ways of doing things? And so that's really, really important.
Yeah, I completely agree. So as I mentioned earlier, I have a management module. Can you list some of the salient features of the module you have proposed?
Sure. So the module that I teach on is part of a human resource management master's program, right? So the master's program and the way the programs are designed in the UK is that every program has a certain number of credits that you need to complete. And each module has a fixed number of credits, depending on how long it's taught. And, so depending on the credits, it's the number of assessments, the period of, how many weeks that particular module will be taught, what are the kind of exercises that'll be on the module. So that's the first thing. It's a master's level program. And then the credits. So I teach on what's called a double credit module, which means it's 30 credits out of 160, if I'm not mistaken, or 100. Yeah. So it's one of the bigger modules, and it's a research module. So again, you have to have a lot of independent thinking, a lot of research skills to be able to excel in that particular module. But it's also a professional development module. So when students join this HRM program, they get a professional accreditation. So they belong to the CIPD, which is the Chartered Institutes of People for HR professionals. So they get that professional qualification as well. So a lot is required to, they need to demonstrate quite a lot on this particular module. Having said that, we're very open about the students that we take. So I have students who have never done a management course in their life, people who have studied social work or English, or they're engineers. So for them, management terminology is just absolutely alien. They have a vague idea that they like people, and they like to work with people. So they take an HR course because, they don't like math, not really enthusiastic about marketing. Finance is out of the question. Operations is boring. So the unfortunate thing is when they get to the program, they realize, oh, I actually need to know how to do data analysis. I actually need to understand balance sheets. I actually need to understand operations of an organization. I need to understand global supply chains because I need to understand how a business works and what the people within this business need. I need to show strategic value addition to senior leadership, but why we need to take certain people-related decisions. So I need to be able to communicate effectively. I need to show where the profit comes from. I need to show how I'm demonstrating growth for this organization. So there's actually quite a lot. And I think what happens on this module is they get a bit of a shock because they think it's an easy ride. And then they find out, oh, I'm in trouble now. So a lot of this module has got to do in the initial stages of setting the scene. So we've got in that as facilitating that, one of the things that we do is I work across the different aspects of the school. So for example, we have what's called a liaison librarian. Over the university has several departments and several schools, like the School of Engineering, archaeology, law, so on and so forth.
Okay.
So every one of the schools has a liaison librarian who's their main point of contact. So one of the first things I do is, because again, it's a research-based module, I get people in from different parts of the school. So the first week, for example, they have a one-to-one, they have a guest, session with the librarian who actually teaches them how to use a library. It's very basic and fundamental. And trust me, students can you think of your education? Maybe in AMU, Aligarh, it's better, but how many times do students actually have to go to the library and find material that's relevant to answering a question? So they don't even have the library skills. Yeah. So how do you find, how do you use keyword searches? What are databases? How do you, how do I know that which particular article or resource I'm finding is a high quality article? How do I assess that? And then we do critical writing exercises, critical thinking, we read something together. So a good part of this module has that bit of innovation, which is really setting the stage for success. So I try my hardest to make it easy for them to understand that there's quite a lot to do, but here are the resource people around various parts of the school who can help you, the librarian being an example. Another thing that I introduced into the module is I have guest speakers from around the world. These are HR professionals or experts in their area. So Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, obviously the UK, US, India, wherever I can find a guest speaker who's willing to be developmental and support students. So they come, they spend their time, they give it for free. Every week there's a new topic. So based on the topic, we will have guest speakers from around the world. So I try to balance having a guest speaker that's international with the guest speaker that's from the UK, because again, I'm trying to get them to understand on any given topic, there are multiple perspectives with which we view how to decide to solve that problem. I also make sure that there's a big spread across different industries. And I'm very keen to make sure that it's inclusive. So I have everyone from different minority ethnic backgrounds, different parts, as I said, international, but also those who are disabled. So I try to make sure that students get that exposure, and all of the people who come on with the express understanding that students can get in touch with them. They develop a LinkedIn profile as a professional. They can connect with all of these people. They can go back to them later on. Some of them are subject matter experts. For example, for the data analytics week, I have one of the 3 global auditors in the UK for the ISO 3400 series accreditation for HR, for the HR side. So it's really hard otherwise to get access to these people. So I try to bring them into the classroom. Students have an engagement with them. Another innovation that I brought in is they have a full day consultancy workshop. So they learn the skills, the behaviors, and then they have a day to apply it. So we have clients coming in from, we organize with an external facilitator, but we have 3 different types of clients come in. The clients provide a brief, which last year it was a recruitment brief. Students then have to design a solution as external consultants for these clients within the classroom space, and then they have to present. And the client and a panel evaluates their presentations. So it's not the module leader. So it's not an academic background. It's very much a professional, external facing background. So that's another innovation. In terms of the teaching side, I've got everything from learning resources, everything from podcasts to movies, music, case studies, negotiation exercises. We have trade labor union people come in. We have people, so it's every week there's something new and innovative going on. Assessments are largely written, but during the learning process, there's a very diverse set of pedagogical tools for them to use. Because as I said, students are coming from various different backgrounds. So if I don't introduce all of these things, by introducing all of these things, it makes it easier for them to engage on the module. So there's other stuff, but those were some of the main things.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. Moving forward, you have worked extensively in management, and particularly how multicultural and diverse individuals play a part in organizational structure. So what interested you in this field?
So as I mentioned, my upbringing has been an international classroom. I'm very used to having people who look differently, think differently, and behave differently from me. I love it. I thoroughly enjoy that space because I get to know more about myself and I get to know more about the world that way. And growing up in the Middle East, this is one of the, and I'm sure a lot of people who've grown up in the GCC might say the same thing. If you have that opportunities to engage with different kinds of people, life is exciting. You're always discovering something new all the time. My latest discovery is, K-dramas. So it's good fun. It's good fun to see how people live in different parts of the world. And every time you see something engage with the other, something that's alien, foreign, different, what happens is you tend to then think back and reflect on, why do I do this like the way that I do? Why do I do that? So there's a journey of self-discovery for selfish reasons, but there's also the fascination about how things are. And subhanAllah, Allah's creations, how diverse people are from all over the world. And sometimes even when you look at it from a religious perspective, and I remember, when you read translation and things like, I remember one about, we will test you with your children, we will test you with wealth, and there's even food. And I remember as a young person reading that, I'm like, who gets obsessed with food? And then, I know that obesity is a problem, for example, in the UK. The real problem, processed food is a problem. So, so it kind of even makes, for me personally, my connection to my deen and my connection to Allah even better, having that kind of multicultural space. So that's from childhood onwards. And then what happened is when we went back to the Middle East as a family, and I worked for a hospital briefly, and I had to manage a very multicultural team. Now, everyone speaks English, but for team meetings, I would have to speak Pakistani English, South Indian English, Arabic English, Filipino English, Jordanian English, to get any team meeting done. Because some languages don't have a past tense or a future tense or a present tense. Other languages, you have to be very clear how, there's direct versus indirect communication. So if you give direct orders, it's considered a personal affront and it's rude. So you have to speak to them indirectly. Yet in other cultures, if you don't speak to them directly, they think then they have freedom to do whatever they want. So they don't follow the instructions or the guidance of the training. So I was I was fascinated. I mean, alhamdulillah, it was fun. I enjoyed it. And, different skill levels, different education levels. And I thought, wow, there's so much here. And I know that I enjoyed it. And I was given that role because I had that background and I already had that lived experience of working with people from different backgrounds. So in that sense, I didn't find it so much of a struggle. But I realized, this is actually really difficult for a lot of people who come from very homogeneous backgrounds. And then what happens is we have all of these biases, for example, attribution bias. We don't even know we're prejudiced. We don't even realize what our biases are. So sometimes, if I say the word, crime, criminals, what kind of figure comes to your mind? For a lot of people, in this country, Black people come to mind. If I say that there's if you're walking down the street and there's somebody with a Black person with a hood on their head, you're going to be more alarmed than a white person walking on the same street. And why? Where did you get that idea from? Have you ever had an experience where a Black person has attacked you? No. So there's no experience. There's no thing to fall back on. So where is that coming from? So it's coming from what we've been socialized to think about other people.
Yeah.
So if you're growing up in those environments, and then, you know, your boss is a Black man, you're going to be feeling threatened, even though the guy has done nothing to you, has done absolutely, it could be the nicest person and a total gentleman, but you're still going to feel threatened because that's the conditioning that you have had. So I realized that I was fascinated by this space. So both from my background growing up, but also my work experience working with a multicultural team and leading a multicultural team.
Okay. So multiculturalism is a hotly debated area of study, and both India and the UK are considered multicultural societies. Because these societies are multicultural, there exist deep-rooted conflicts and tensions within them. So according to you, how people in your positions or practitioners like you can intervene in society to challenge the misconceptions and stereotypes that lead to these conflicts?
So these are huge problems, okay? And big problems need solutions from multiple sides, because big problems don't come up overnight. They have grown over time. And, you know, just as we say, you know, bad news will travel twice as fast as good news, trying to disentangle and, you know, unwork things is much, much harder than building something new. So while academics have a role, civil society has a role, you know, religious scholars have a role, families and parents have a role, you know, educators at school level have a role, your local community has a role. So everybody needs to be involved in trying to make sure that there are positive changes in society and positive changes remain. You know, it's just like learning a good habit. It takes a lot of effort to develop a good habit. You need to have the right environment, the right tools, and the right mindset. But within hours, you can undo that good habit.
Exactly.
So sustaining anything good is hard work, whether it's relationships, whether it's habits, whether it's, you know, eating patterns, whatever it might be, right? Societal issues. So one aspect of it is it takes time and it takes coordinated effort, but the motivation and the will needs to be there. That's my first few points. The second part of that is organizations are not isolated islands that are not part of a larger society. So it's not that you wear your suit and tie and you go into work and suddenly you don't have any societal prejudice that have been ingrained while you are outside in the car parking lot, for example. You are bringing that into your workplace. So organizations have to be really very aware of what the social, you know, what's happening in the society, what the problems are in the society, political issues that are, you know, used to pit people against one another. And, you know, that's the history of mankind is, you know, one person pitting against now for, you know, whatever purposes that may be, power, money, gain, land, you know, trade routes, whatever it might be. So it's not anything new. The issues I think now is those problems are amplified much more easily through fake news and the lack of critical thinking of the people who pass things on these stupid WhatsApp groups. You know, when you pass something on, you're actually adding to the problem if you've not fact-checked anything. The fact that we are short on time, so we are willing to believe stuff. There's much more sophisticated ways of passing lies around. So it looks like there's a half-truth. So there is partially true, but the other second half of it is untrue. So then you do know the first half is true, so your tendency to believe the second half, you know, this is a different type of bias. So there's a lot of work to be done, and it's not on academics alone. Having said that, the small areas within which we can work is when we are invited to organizational settings or interviews like this, for example, then we have an opportunity to share that knowledge, right? So one of the first things for any type of understanding that biases and prejudice is the normal human condition. If anybody says, oh, I'm not racist, I'm not homophobic, I'm not this or that ism or this, they're lying. Everybody is. Everybody has very, very, you know, levels of prejudice and biases. That is what makes you human. You cannot be human and not have these things. It's a very normal thing. The point is, do we then act on it in an unaware fashion? That's where we have a problem. right? So the first thing that we talk about is understanding that you do have prejudices and biases, and this is a very normal thing, but being conscious of where they come from and what they are and why you have them. This is the first place to start. And there's lots of classroom exercises we do or training exercises we do to get them to think. For example, a small example is the one I told you about. There's a black hooded man versus the white man. How do you feel? And then another exercise that I do to kind of make students think about it is to ask them to write down all the people that they trust, very close. They would trust them. They would go to them for anything. So then I ask them to think and write down names, specific names of people. And the second thing I write is, who do you go for advice or support in general? And then I make them think about who are the people they love and who they care for and will always be there for those people. So different categories of. And so I tell them specifically to think about it, think about their lives, and write down these names. Then the question I ask them is, how many of those people come from different social groups than yours? And what people find is the ones they interact with, the people they trust, the people that have got their back, all generally come from their same social circle that they are from. Mm-hmm. And actually, they may be in very diverse classrooms, or they may be living in very multicultural societies, but they don't have any connection with anybody. They don't have any trusted relationships with anyone, which means you haven't made an effort to meet anybody new or spend time, because you need to take time to develop these trusting relationships, right? So you can't say I live in a multicultural society, but for example, I'm from, my roots are Kerala. I don't have a single Bihari friend. Mm-hmm. I don't know anything about Meghalaya. Right? So how Indian am I in my ability to connect with fellow Indians? I have more in common with somebody who lives in Liverpool. I have things to talk about, local politics, the bus route, it rained today. I have more connection with somebody here who's my neighbor, maybe, than I have with my own, fellow Indian countrymen. So the first thing is, do we really have any connections to the people who we live amongst? And it starts from there. And are those connections well developed? Are they places of trust? So if you're looking at it from a political perspective, why do we have these, distrust? Because we don't know anything about the other person. And fear, if there's one thing that'll motivate you, it is fear. That's insecurity, fears for your life, fears for your loved one. You're more likely to react when you're in fear of something or worried about something than any other time. Like, for example, that walking every day or exercise is good for you, but you'll do it. You'll do it tomorrow. Okay, the day after. I'll get too tired today. But you're sick now, and the doctor tells you, listen, you got 6 months to live unless you clean up your act. You will definitely start walking. Because that fear of dying is going to motivate you, right? So we as human beings, we're funny like that. The minute we are in any form of threat, or there's an insecurity, or there's a fear, we're more likely to react, and there's a gut reaction to that, which is to protect, to enclose, to cut off, to excuse everything that is the other. So in these spaces, when there's a constant, you're bombarded with, oh, the other people are going to hurt you. Because these immigrants are there, you're not going to get classroom spaces. There's not enough housing because of the other person. So every time you constantly vilify other people, and if you create a fear, that is when the conflict arises and difficulties arise. So we need to create much more inclusive spaces where communities can engage with one another, whether they're different people within an organization or at a societal level, where people can engage with in one another in safe spaces. There is no threat, and you come together as equals. You share something in common, because we have so much that evokes common things. This is why everybody loves cat videos. Everybody loves videos of babies, because there's a shared humanity. We are people at the end of the day. We're all worried about the same things, and we want goodness for everybody. Nobody really, there's the intolerant lot that I'm not talking about those, but the general human person, general person in any part of the world, they still want good things for everyone. We all feel empathy when there's a cyclone and people have died, or there's an earthquake and people, tragedy strikes. We had floods in Kerala, whatever it is. We have empathy. We have natural empathy for one another. It is when an external party, for whatever reasons, is creating a scarcity mindset and mere fear, that's when we have problems. So what is there really a problem? Can we find common ways to work with one another? Can we find that shared humanity? Those are the kind of things that we need to work as a collective. And it's hard work, and it's daily work, and it's exhausting emotionally and physically. That is why we all need one another, whether it's the legal system, civil bodies, your mother, everyone's part of this journey.
Yeah.
And I think Islamically, that is part of our role as human beings, as Muslims on earth as well, to enjoin goodness, to believe and enjoin goodness. So I think it's actually a requirement as Muslims.
I can actually connect with what you said earlier, that being someone from Aligarh, Aligarh itself is a pretty multicultural city, but I personally don't have any friends from any other state. I don't have any Bihari friends or some other place, or even Kerala friends. I don't have them, even though they people from those states are here as well. So I think that we need to make changes and make an effort to make a change in the society, right?
Yeah, it starts with, Michael Jackson said, I'm looking at the man in the mirror. It does start that all of us individually, whether it is from a religious perspective or just a human perspective, I think religiously it's mandated. What is LSE? We created you in different tribes that you may get to know one another. So we're actually mandated to get to know. Seek knowledge, even if you have to go to China for it. Travel, meet people, engage with the other. That was the whole basis of the golden era. Curiosity, ask questions. Do you not see how the sun follows the moon, whatever it is? Do you not see what's happening in nature? Think, use your brains, inquire, get to know, find out, talk to others. These are all things that have been taught to us from day one. So I think as Muslims, unfortunately, one may think it's a burden, but I think it's a fascinating place to be lucky that one has this moral mandate to actually go and meet new people. You have a moral mandate to learn, to be excited, to travel, to use the internet for something useful. Cat videos are good, but there's so much out there, and there's so much to live in life. There's so many wonderful things out there, and learn trekking, go scuba diving, see what's underwater. There's so many interesting things. So I think to have that moral mandate to go and enjoy your life and enrich your life, I think we're lucky that way. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah. I think with the passage of time, as humans, we have become pretty secluded, and we started liking solitude.
Yeah, I think it's easier, right? It doesn't require you to self-reflect. And I think this is where the early education, and even at home, sometimes it breaks my heart. When I see sometimes how parents talk to their children, do it because I told you so. Uma, why do I have to? I told you so. Don't question me.
We fear questions.
Yeah. And why are you? I've seen this with Islamic scholars, in the olden days. You shouldn't ask why did the Prophet say that? Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? Don't ask questions. Are you questioning the Prophet? No, I'm just asking what is the thinking behind. I want to know more.
You're kind of shunning critical thinking at this point as well.
Yeah. And so what happens is when it then becomes the stakes are higher, right? And the stakes are higher. We're in the business world. We're in society. We're out of our comfort zone. It's more scary then because we haven't done that work in the early stages of our lives. And we have been told constantly, shut up, keep quiet, don't ask questions, don't act over smart. You're being sacrilegious, you're being unruly, you're not a good girl or a good child. So by asking a question or thinking differently, that's not true. And it's also not Islamic in my understanding of Islam.
Yeah, not at all. So you have written about the contribution of multicultural individuals to teams and workspaces. How does the presence of multiculturalism affect team dynamic and shared workspaces?
Okay, so I want to clarify one thing from your question. There are two levels of multiculturalism that's in your question. So just to specify, I study multicultural individuals. So these are individuals, and this is the work that I'm published in. These are individuals who identify with, have knowledge of, and have internalized the values of more than one societal culture. So, for example, I'm Muslim, I'm Malayali. So there's the Islamic culture, there's the culture that comes from Kerala. I was born and brought up in the Middle East, so I have a little bit of Arab culture within me. And I live here in the UK. There's I have my British side as well. So I have varying levels of knowledge of all of these different cultures. I have varying levels of identification with all of these cultures, and I have varying levels of internalization of the values of these cultures. But I'm multicultural in that sense because I have all three: knowledge, identification, and internalization of these four cultures. And if you can tell, the cultures are their societal cultures. So there are different levels. Islam is global. So as a Muslim, it's a global society, that we're talking about. Kerala is specific to that state. Arab is regional. And UK, specifically Liverpool. So I love the city and I like the culture of the city. I'm not really connected to, I don't know, Sheffield or something, some other Birmingham. I'm not a Mancunian, but Liverpool, yes, I'm proud to be from Liverpool. So that's what we mean by societal culture. So what do people like myself or others who are multicultural, if they're working in an international team, what are they bringing to that international team? That's one of my core areas of research. So there's a lot of theorizing to suggest, multicultural individuals, they have all of these different knowledge sets. They have understanding of other values and cultures. They will probably understand the behaviors of others. Maybe they are multilingual and they can speak different languages. So they'd be great as acting as cultural bridgers in international teams. They could help, bring different types of thinking together and create a shared team model. They might be great for communication purposes. They might be helping to reduce conflict in teams and enhance cohesion. Then all of this theorizing about wonderful things that multicultural individuals could potentially do. So I kind of question that. I'm not saying that they can't do it. And there is reason for theorizing that because we have experiments and we have other studies at smaller scales within teams and in labs. But my study is one of the few studies that actually puts this to test in a very diverse setting in Bahrain. And what I find is multicultural individuals may have these abilities, but they're not really willing to do the work unless there is a conducive climate and leadership, supportive leadership to do that work. So in fact, I also find that in these contexts, perceptions of discrimination, the minute somebody feels like they're being discriminated against because of the cultural background they come from, that is by far the biggest predictor of every type of conflict and every negative effect on team cohesion and satisfaction as a team member, right? So I specifically studied perceived discrimination in this context because perceived discrimination is so difficult to solve. If there's overt discrimination, you can prove it. And there's usually a legal or organizational policy to deal with it. But a perception that I'm being treated differently, I can't prove it. I can feel it, and it's my gut feeling, and I can see certain behaviors. But how do I prove somebody's treating me badly when I don't have any proof? But now I've lost trust. And then now every time other people are getting along with that, I've lost trust of the other person as well. So perceived discrimination is a real issue. And I find that multicultural individuals have massive problems with this, but generally people have problems with this. And with multicultural individuals, they vote with their feet. They quit these organizations. So whatever potential goodness they brought just walks out through the door. That talent leaves the door. Why is this important? Because there are definitely a rise in the number of multicultural individuals who are coming into work. We have more global, movement. There's more migration. There's a lot more in the past. Going to the Gulf was a big deal. Now we have people going to Canada, Australia. Then they're settling down. We have a lot more intercommunity marriages. So in the past, if you were from a particular state in India, you kind of married within families, known families. Now people are marrying, within my own family, for example, where I have they go to the US and then they're Indian origin and they marry, Palestinian, for example.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of cross-cultural marriages happening. So you've got two different cultures living in a third culture. So multicultural individuals are only going to be on the rise. So for organizations, whether they're civil organizations or for-profit organizations or not-for-profit, you're going to see more and more multicultural individuals coming up. Even within the country context in India, we have so many people from North India working in the South. And if they choose to get married and settle and their children grow up in these environments, they're going to be different from the original Bihari and Madhya Pradesh person who came down, right? It's going to be different. So people need to be a lot more aware. The other thing is, even if we don't have more multicultural individuals, we do have more migration. So perceptions for leadership, for team leaders, managers, if they give out that they are inadvertently, without realizing, because they aren't aware of their own prejudices and biases, if they give the impression to any member in their team that the other person is getting discriminated, then you're going to have, it is the one strongest predictor of every type of team conflict. That is just a disaster waiting to happen. So team leaders, the kind of training that we give, we do need to give intercultural training. We do need to be able to support leaders, anybody with a managerial role, anybody in charge of a team, with help in terms of, understanding where their own biases are coming from, what they are, how to deal with them, better quality decision-making. All of these things we need to help and support. Otherwise, we're gonna, people ask, why do we have these, big Gopal gas tragedy, why Volkswagen scandal? Because we don't help people when they need help. And then the problem just gets bigger and bigger and rolls over, and then the problem is too big for any one person to handle. So, like I said, everything needs, if you need to sustain goodness, it's hard work every day. And if we don't start at the beginning stages, it's harder at the later stages in the senior leadership. So this is why this kind of research is really important, especially in the international business context, but generally for societies and even in domestic contexts.
So even though you have studied in your area of interest is multicultural individuals, right? But what should workspaces do to make their workspaces be more comfortable to people coming from diverse backgrounds?
Inclusion, there's quite a lot of things that you can do. One thing is, and we're going to be here for some time if I get on this, but one definite thing is starting from the place, a lot of focus in organizations is on recruitment, and there's a lot of token hiring. If you wear a hijab in a Western environment, you're the token hire many times. And you'll be the one person in 300 people who's working there, but your picture will be on the website and your picture will be on the marketing thing, on the recruitment for whatever, promotional material. Any organization that is using minorities or diversity as a marketing tool for access and legitimacy in the market is going to fail. People are not stupid. They will see through that. And they hate it. People actually hate it. So that's one aspect. Second thing is, like I said, so don't do that. If you really want to help, make sure that you're creating inclusive environments, focus on promotion. How many of the people that you hire who come from a disadvantaged minority background, and disadvantaged, I also include people with disabilities. Where are all our people with disabilities? Every human being at some point in their life will experience some form of disability. You're going to lose your eyesight after a while. Everybody's going to need glasses, especially with the way we're using screens. There's every chance you're going to have a fall at some point in your life and have a mobility issue, right? So disability is not, there are disabled people and non-disabled. That's not how it works. Everybody at some point will have a disability, right? So where are these people in your senior management? What's the promotion criteria? How are they going up? What support or individual adjustments do these people need going up? So that's, parents who are caring for young children. So every category of people generally needs individual kinds of concerns, or category for that category of people, there are things that need to be done to support them, right? Maybe for people who have caring responsibilities, they have, you have two generations living in a household and they have elderly people they need to take care of. Maybe flexible working arrangements are important. And then therefore flexible working arrangements to do independent work. But then when it comes to committee meetings or social gatherings at work, they make them at times which are inclusive. So if you're making your social gathering at work for, I don't know, team building exercises, and you're doing it in the evening, a lot of people cannot come. It particularly excludes certain kinds of people. So any activity that's being designed, constantly check, is this being inclusive of all of the people that we want? Are we showing that we are valued? So that's, so one side is not just the recruitment and using it as eyewash and, window dressing, but seeing the whole way through a career path. Second thing is to look at policies and reevaluate. Are we being as inclusive as we can be in every single way? A third thing to consider, mentorship doesn't really work unless there is a clear path for progression. So that's not, it's not something I recommend. Only certain kinds of mentorship programs can work if it's actually valued, especially the person that needs to be valued as the mentor. So for example, promotion criteria. If good mentoring is one of the promotion criteria to reach a senior leadership position, then mentoring works really well, because the success of your mentee is part of your success, and that's how you progress in your career. But otherwise, saying that I've been a mentor and you put it on your CV, but the mentee has not had any positive experience, those things don't work. It's again one of those eye-washing things. So these are some of the examples I can think of right off the bat. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you so much. So moving to the final question, what advice would you give to young women aspiring to pursue a research path like yours?
So that's a very loaded question. So young women where? In the Indian context or in the Muslim community?
From among our audience, I would say.
Let me do this in two ways. I would say any young person. Research is, so let me start with just youth. If you have been that rebellious kid in class who was always asking questions, go do a PhD. Research is your world, because your whole life is asking questions. Is it really the way that we think it is? And you are actually paid, and your whole career is to ask questions and find answers. Good quality answers, to find robust answers. The challenge is in designing research in such a way that you can find strong answers or robust answers, rigor, that you have rigor in your research. So if you've ever wanted to know and discover anything in the world, whether it's the cosmology or whether it's what happens underground, archaeology, any science, any field of inquiry, any bit of knowledge, and you're a curious person, consider doing a PhD. So that's the first thing. If you are a woman, in terms of career, or even both men and women, this is a long career. All good things take time. We all like everything to finish quickly, but a PhD is not something that finishes. It takes time because you're developing something that's a new piece of knowledge. You're adding to human knowledge. So to do that, it's serious work. So you have to be really interested, but you also have to have the discipline to work through it. You have to persevere. And it doesn't mean that you're every day going to have excellent outputs and excellent level of productivity and every day you feel enthused. In fact, I was at a conference just earlier last month, and we had very senior people on the panel, and they were talking about their career journeys. And, one was a dean of a business school, and, one of the heads of this, the international organization, she was saying, some days she said, nothing works. The brain doesn't work. Nothing comes, bored. And she was saying, and I won't tell her name, but she was saying she binge watched 78 episodes of Korean drama for 2 days running. Okay, so that's something. Some days are just like that. because this is
Okay.
exhausting. It's actually quite, so you have to have the stamina. So not just the passion, but the discipline and the stamina to stay in the long game. It's a long game. It's very, like, even after you collect the data, it takes about 2 years to get published, right? So it's the long game. It's not a career or a path for somebody who wants to go into work, shut it off and come back and it's over, whatever it is. That's not how this works. And then generally, like I said earlier, have that inquiring skill, that resilience to stick with it. Lastly, I want to say for women in India and within the community, but in any collectivistic society, that if you're from a collectivistic society, especially for women, because there is a gender penalty, there is so much pressure to conform. You don't know how much pressure you're in a particular group or a particular upbringing until you take yourself out of that group. And then you live with people who have never lived in a collectivistic space. So collectivistic spaces are places where you sacrifice the individual gain for the general good of the collective. That's kind of a simple version of what collectivism is. Oftentimes, women and those in minority positions or less, people, children, disabled, dogs, whatever, who don't have that much power, voice, status, they have to sacrifice even more. So the less power and status they have, the more you end up sacrificing, right? In collectivistic societies. So understanding where you lie in this hierarchy in your particular home. So in some people's homes, women, alhamdulillah, I've been really, really blessed that in my home, the women, and especially my mom's side, always been highly educated, always been encouraged to study. In fact, my mom was the first person in the family to actually apply for a PhD program, and she actually joined. She subsequently didn't continue. She chose something else. But she was the first person in the family to actually apply for a PhD program and get in. So I'm very blessed, alhamdulillah. And I very much want to acknowledge that I've reached where I've reached because I've had that privilege from the family that I come from, both my dad's side and my mom's side. My dad's side was they came from a village, but very strong. My father was very keen about understanding the value of education. And, the reason I got a lot of those A report cards throughout was because of the values both my parents have taught of the importance of education. So whether male or female, it was expected from everybody in the house. So in that sense, I do come from a strong background which supports education and critical thinking. So understanding where you lie in the family situation that you are in and the society that you're in and the society that your family keeps around you, it is more and more challenging if there's less and less avenues for independence. So you have to cut that psychological umbilical cord at some point to grow up. It is hard work, and you should think about what support networks you do have. Again, I didn't even know what a PhD was. It was because I did that MBA and I chose to go back to university after getting a divorce with 2 children because my parents supported that I met somebody who taught me what a PhD was, who even opened up that world to me. And, so once you start, what I'm saying is other people will come and you will be connected, So, but it does start with you. Whatever change you want or whatever you want, you have to find the courage and be wise in terms of finding out the resources. Connect with people who, look out into the world. There are lots of women who have done amazing things, specifically Muslim women from the Indian context. They're out there. And that's, the Rising Beyond the Ceiling group. They've done an amazing job of identifying quite a few. Get in touch with these women. Find out pathways and find out where you can get support, because there's a whole world out there, and go live your life. That is my advice.
That was amazing. That was beautiful advice. So thank you so much, Dr. Salma, for joining us today, and it was an incredibly insightful conversation. I hope everybody watching gained something from it. Thank you so much for taking out some time.
Aisha, I'm happy to be here, and I hope this is useful for your listeners, and I hope I've enjoyed speaking to you. I hope it's useful for anybody out there who's listening. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.